Spezza tracks it down in front. Matthews to Marner. Have to hurry. Tim scores! John Tavares overtime winner!
This is absolutely unbelievable by Austin Matthews. A complete turnaround. Take the cake to Mitch Marner.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of From the Booth. I'm John Bartlett alongside Greg Millen. As on this episode, we welcome our friend and fellow colleague from Sportsnet, Rick Ball.
Yes, I've spent more than a few days with Rick on the road. I can tell you one thing, this will be a great interview because he is one funny guy.
He sure is, and you're going to get to see a bit of that right now as we welcome from Sportsnet, Rick Ball. Rick, how are you doing these days?
I'm great, you guys. Like most people, I'm in my bunker, my doomsday bunker, under a pallet full of toilet paper and Purell, and just waiting for the end times.
Your humor hasn't changed. I know that. And you know what has changed even a little bit more? Are you and Elliot having a competition here for the beards? I mean, you got it going. I love it.
Well, Elliot looks more Amish, I think, with his beard. I've gone he should be raising a barn somewhere. I think I've gone full Ryan O'Reilly playoff beard, or maybe roadie for the Allman Brothers. And then my hair, this is like young Michael Landon, the salad.
Now, is your wife going to cut it like everybody else? Is that in the cards coming up?
Yeah, I may have to request that. Yeah, because it's starting to get pretty. By the way, all my references will be from the 70s, just so you're prepared for that. So anybody under the age of 48 is not going to get anything I say.
Careful on the haircuts. I've seen some scary ones already. I think the wives are a bit of a payback, but I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah. The other thing with the beards, I know you guys have been doing the beard. I was thinking about doing the beard. The problem is with all this, you're really not supposed to touch your face. So I think a beard would make it worse for me when I've had one, I want to get at it more. I don't know how that
I look at it, if I keep letting it grow out over my mouth like it is, it's like a natural face mask. I don't even have to go buy anything now. I guess, people are pulling their shirts up over their face. I've got one on there permanently. So I think it's like a filter. Like all those things you put in your, you put in your furnace to get the dog hair keep it from spreading around the house. I've got that on my face. So I think I'll be okay.
Now when I do a playoff round with Rick Ball, I'm laughing an awful lot because there's a bit of a size in this comedian, so it's pretty good.
We had fun, Millsy and I, a couple of years ago, and I know, John, you work with Greg all the time. We did a couple of series a couple of years ago, Pittsburgh, Philly, and Pittsburgh, Washington, and that was a lot of fun, although we spent so much money. All we did is eat at expensive steakhouses the entire time. We needed every series to go 11 games just so we could afford to pay for a per diem.
Yeah, we heard about that. Actually, well, why don't we start there? We'll rewind back. Why don't we start there? Sure. Your partner with the Calgary Flames, Kelly Hrudey, talked just about that and your love and selection of the wine list. Here's what Kelly had to say about that on a previous episode.
Rick Ball you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And we do enjoy some nice dinners together. But the trick is, Millsy, if you work with him again, when you guys sit down and they bring the dinner menus and the wine list, grab the wine list before Rick.
Oh, yeah.
He chooses wines that are out of my league. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I learned.
Right? So whenever that wine list comes by, I try to do my best to grab it before Rick gets his fingers on it.
So there you have it. Greg thinks that you're too expensive on the bill, and Kelly thinks that he's got to get to the wine list before you because of price. Your chance for a rebuttal now, sir.
That's funny. Kelly Hrudey complaining about somebody else picking expensive wines is like Shaquille O'Neal making fun of somebody else's shoe size. He goes, don't let him. He makes it sound like he's drinking his wine out of a jug with a handle on it. This guy has expensive. He likes his good wine too. So I think we're equal partners in crime in that category. But we had a lot of fun on the road, and we do enjoy a good meal and a nice bottle of wine every now and then, I have to admit. So
now he mentioned as well.
I don't hear him complaining very much.
Well, he mentioned as well about the ice in the wine to ruin a good red wine. I mean, you're a red wine guy. What is that? Like, seriously.
I've learned. So this is the secret about Kelly now. He talks about, I like my my red wine cold, so I put ice in it. But what I've learned is if it's a good bottle, he won't put ice in it. So the giveaway, whether or not he likes the bottle of wine you picked, is whether or not he puts ice in it. If he takes a sip and no ice goes in, you've made a good choice. So I've learned all his tricks. Yeah.
We have exposed Kelly Hrudey and his wine. If ice is in it, it's not a good wine. All right. Well, we'll have to see what he thinks about that on another show. We'll get him back on that one. Oh boy.
Well, let's go back, Rick. Yeah. Let's rewind here, and we've asked everybody this, and there's some wonderful stories. It's particularly for young broadcasters. How did you get your start? How did you get into broadcasting? And could you tell us your journey a little bit? When you did start this all off.
I always loved radio when I was a kid. I had this weird obsession with talk radio for some reason. I remember as a 9 and 10-year-old listening in my little clock radio I got it for Christmas one year, and it was the greatest thing ever. And listening at night, there used to be a show called Open Phone Canada, and it was like a political talk show on in the evening. I had no idea what they were talking about, but I just liked the idea of it. Guys sitting in a studio, people phoning in, all that stuff. So I was always fascinated with broadcasting. And then I loved sports, and I played everything. Wasn't particularly good at much, but I loved it. I knew it wasn't going to go anywhere with it after high school was over. So I always thought, well, maybe sports broadcasting will be something, sort of meshing the two things that I really liked into a potential career. And coincidentally, when I grew up in Kelowna, BC, and the custodian in my high school was a guy named Wayne Horning, who was an old hockey coach. He just happened to be the color analyst on the local junior hockey broadcast. So he found out that I was interested in broadcasting and introduced me to the sports director at a radio station who did the play-by-play, a guy named Brian Cooling, when I was in grade 11, and took a liking to me and literally would have me, I'd play in a high school basketball tournament, and then at the end of the tournament would call in a report and they'd run it on the radio the next day. And that's how I got started. I literally play, and then I'd phone in a 45-second report at the end of the tournament. They played on the radio. I thought it was cool, and he started using me a little more. Basically worked for gas money. It was for free, but I really liked it, and he seemed to take a liking to me. And that it's funny how things kind of nudge you onto a path. I mean, the custodian to meeting the sports director, suddenly doing these reports, and I thought, hey, this is something I really enjoy, and that led to me ultimately getting into broadcasting school. I got my diploma in broadcast journalism. And then my first job, full-time job out of that school was back at that same radio station that I did some work for in high school. So that's how it got started. And, and ultimately I got a chance to do play-by-play. That's a whole other story, but that's certainly what pushed me onto the path of getting into broadcasting.
Before we get into the play-by-play story, I do want to hear that, but I just thinking out loud here when you were telling me that you used to report on your own basketball games. I would assume you were the best player in the game.
Yeah, I was going to say that too.
Pretty much every game. Is that true?
Yeah, people in Kelowna were shocked I didn't make the NBA at the end of my high school career, based on the reports they kept hearing on the radio. But I tried to be fair. It's hard though. Definitely, whenever I had a good game, it got highlighted in my report at the end of the tournament for sure.
So a 35-point loss, but Rick Ball was the star of the game tonight. He had 2 baskets, and they were outstanding.
How about hockey now? How'd that all happen?
So I was working at a radio station in Kelowna. The Rockets weren't even there yet. They still were. The Rockets were in Tacoma at the time, and it was when I started. The team was in the BC Junior League, which is the Junior A League. Was the Kelowna Spartans, and they were really good. They actually won the Centennial Cup. The Royal Bank Cup was called the Centennial Cup back then, which is the national Tier 2 championship. And the year that they went to the Centennial Cup, nobody did play-by-play. I went and covered it, which was great. It was in Amherst, Nova Scotia, and anybody who's been to the Maritimes knows how much fun that can be. But I came back after that, and I went to the general manager of the radio station. I said, this is embarrassing that nobody did play-by-play of the team that won the national championship in our town. I said, we should do it. And I kept pressuring. He didn't want to. And his name was Dean Cooper. And I kept saying, listen, we need to be doing play-by-play. This is a really good team. This was the following season. He finally reneged and gave me a chance to do play-by-play for that team in 1993. We did the playoffs that year. They went to the Centennial Cup again and lost in overtime in the final that year. But I got to call all those games, and that got me into doing play-by-play. And it really is what I wound up. I loved more than anything else was doing that. It was a whole other experience in the business of broadcasting, as you guys know, obviously. So I took a liking to it. I thought I might have had a knack for it, even though I was green as grass at doing it. We did this next year as well for the Spartans in Junior A. And then the year after that, the Rockets moved to town. And I got the gig doing the Kelowna Rockets for the next 5 years after that. I rode the buses all across Western Canada, covered the Rockets, did every game, playoffs for 5 straight years before I finally got my first ever National Hockey League shot. That was in 2000. But that's how it all started. It was it's funny because I always thought this is something I'd like to do. The GM didn't really want to do it. I kept being a pain in the butt. I think ultimately he just wanted to get me out of his office. So he said, all right, let's do it. And had that not happened, who knows? But it did, and it got me, again, talking about little things that nudge you onto a path, right? It got me going down that path, and I really, really enjoyed it. And here we are all those years later.
Perseverance pays off sometimes with that stuff, and it's funny. I think we all have similar stories. That moment where you knew somebody took the chance on you, or you convinced them to take the chance on yourself, and that's where it turns out. Next thing you know, you're riding the bus in junior, which in the Western Hockey League, there's a lot of miles and a lot of overnight rides and stuff. Do you have any great stories or memories from riding the bus in junior?
Oh,
as we all do.
Many. Yeah, we have, but it's interesting because Stan Butler, who coached in the Ontario Hockey League for years, I think he's still there, if I'm not mistaken.
Coached my son for a bit. I know Stan.
Yeah. So Stan came one year and coached in Prince George. Now, Prince George is the furthest outpost in the Western Hockey League. It's, 7 hours to the next closest team, which is Kamloops. So I saw Stan, and I asked him, I said, what do you think of travel up here? Because I used to talk to the opposition coach every game, and he goes, this is crazy. He goes, in the Ontario League last year when he coached there, we spent 5 nights in a hotel.
Yeah.
He goes, with Prince George, we're spending 50. So it just shows you how different the travel is in the Western Hockey League. And, just climbing on that bus and I remember the first year that I was doing games. The Rockets played a Friday, Saturday, Sunday on the road in Portland on Friday. That was a 9-hour bus ride all the way back to play a home game in Kelowna on Saturday. So 9 hours overnight. They play at home on Saturday, on the bus overnight again to Prince George. That was 8 hours for a 5 o'clock start on Sunday in Prince George. And I thought about halfway through that trip to Prince George, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And that was the first year of 5. So, it's a grind, but there's a reason so many great players come out of the Western Hockey League. And obviously the caliber of play is it's very NHL style of hockey, as all the major junior leagues are across the country. But I think that league just toughens you up based on the travel alone. If you can survive 4 or 5 years in the Western Hockey League as a player, you can take anything. So there's a lot of tough kids that come out of the WHL. I mean, like literally tough, but also mentally tough because the grind is very real.
Favorite story? Junior story? Maybe Brad Fay. I know you worked with him. There's a story there.
I got a couple. Well, yeah, Brad. So Brad was writing for the newspaper in Kelowna. Him and I were friends. I was in the radio, and he was actually in newspaper, and he was covering the team. So when I started doing play-by-play, since he was covering all the games, I said, why don't you do color with me? And Brad and I worked together doing junior hockey for 3 years in the Western Hockey League. So that was his first foray into broadcasting, and we had an absolutely great time. I remember driving back. So one year in the playoffs, they were playing the Tri-City Americans, and we decided to drive down. It was about a 5-hour drive instead of taking the bus. And we were driving back, and there was, I forget which comet it was. It was the Hale-Bopp comet or something. Happened to be in the night sky, and we were in the middle of Washington State. Like the nearest city was 50 miles away, so it was pitch black. And I said, we got to stop and take a look at this comet. And we pull over the car. We hop out. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I expected it to be this little blip in the sky, like a satellite that you could see. It took up half. It was the most spectacular thing I've ever seen. And we just stood there for about 15 minutes and stared at it. I'm not kidding either. It was absolutely incredible. And for some reason, that memory sticks out. That's a cool moment. I mean, you don't expect to be in the middle of Washington State in the middle of the night driving between Tri-Cities and Kelowna and see something that amazing. So that's one of the stories I can actually tell on the air. There's about 5,000. So we can talk afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah. That's for our after hours special, but that's a whole other program. So how about the path then that, go ahead. What were we going to say?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to say the path then that took you from junior, now you get an opportunity to move up in the ranks and have an opportunity eventually to get to the NHL. So where was the road for you that way?
So after a few years of doing the Western Hockey League, and doing 70 games a year, I think they played, and plus playoffs. So I was starting to get some experience. Felt like, hey, I'm actually getting half decent at this. At that point, it wasn't demo tapes; it was demo CDs. At that point, it was before even the audio files that you could send. But I had a producer help me put together a demo package, and I called Chris Hebb, who worked for a long time with Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment. Before that was with Orca Bay, which owned the Vancouver Canucks. He was their director of broadcasting. And I said, hey, Chris, you don't know me. My name's Rick Ball. I'm the play-by-play guy for the Kelowna Rockets. I'd love to just come and say hi and introduce myself one time next time I'm in Vancouver. He goes, sure, next time you're here, let me know. And that was that. That summer, I was headed to Vancouver. So I called Chris and brought my demo and gave it to him. We had a nice meeting. And he gave it a listen and sent me a nice note, said, hey, I like your work. And that's where it ended. I thought, okay. And once in a while, him and I would chat. And then one day he calls me up and says, I might have some work for you. Would you be interested in doing some TV? That was it. And I said, absolutely. And what happened was Jim Houston then was the television voice for the Canucks, but was also doing national games at the time. And the Canucks sort of split their regional package. Half of them were on Sportsnet and half of them were on a local channel. And when Houston was away doing a national game, and he couldn't do a regional game for one season, there was that conflict. They brought me in, so that was my first chance. I think I did 10 or 12 games that year, and that got my foot in the door. And that was in 2001. My very first game was the Canucks and the Maple Leafs in Vancouver. So that's a marquee matchup. The building's buzzing. All those crazy Toronto fans are in there, and I was more prepared for that game than I had ever prepared for anything else, as you can imagine, right? Your first NHL game. The last thing you want to do is
over-prepared.
Over-prepared.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew every player's grandmother's dog's name, I was that prepared. Except the one thing I didn't know was the name of the guy who was the news anchor that I'd be throwing to at the end of the first period, whose name is Robbie Baishwal. But I didn't know Robbie. I was unfamiliar with him. And so 30 seconds left in the period, Greg Shannon, our producer, goes, all right, at the end of the period, stoppage and play, as you know. So Ryan Walter was doing color. He's talking, and Greg Shannon says to me in my headset, you're going to throw to the VTV newsroom and Robbie Baishwal. I said, pardon? Robbie Baishwal. So now I'm trying to write it down phonetically, and I get about halfway through, play starts up, doesn't stop, period ends, and I go, and now back to the VTV newsroom, here's Ruby Bashwell. And and I thought, my career is over before it started. Of all the things, you throw to the guy who's the news anchor on the station that you're broadcasting on, and you mangle his name. And Robbie's a great news guy, too. I think he went to Chicago after that. I felt so terrible. I thought my career is over before it's even started, but somehow managed to survive.
Like the Vegas Golden Knights.
Yeah, we want to hear your side of that story.
Yeah, what's the other side of that one, too? The chuckle in Vegas, yeah.
Well, yes. And then the thing, I heard Kelly say it, I was going to make some breakfast cereal when I was a kid. Don't get up in the morning and have a big bowl full of golden nuts before I go to school. But the play started, I couldn't make a comment, and he started laughing, and then he couldn't stop for the entire period. So I basically went solo for the last 15 minutes of the first period. So Kelly's a great laugher. He may be the best laugher in the business. But when he gets going, sometimes he has a hard time stopping, but it can be a lot of fun. Yeah, the golden nuts. The other one time he called Boone Jenner Booner by mistake, and that got him going. We were in Columbus. He couldn't stop laughing. So every time I do a Columbus Blue Jackets game now, and I mention Boone Jenner, I always say, of course, as his friends know him better, Booner. And then that gets Kelly.
That's not fair. That is not fair.
You're leading them on.
All right, you two, I got a question for you, because to me, you're both, you have a great mixture, but you kind of lean a little bit to the old school call versus the information age that a lot of the play-by-play guys like, which I happen to like more of the old school as well. So I lean to both of you. Tell me about, let's start with you, Rick, your philosophy on that, and then we'll go to my partner, John, my other partner, John, as well. I want to hear your take on that.
I think that's a good observation. I think John and I do have similar styles in that sense. There's not a lot of catchphrases or, we don't go too deep down the rabbit hole of information during the course of the broadcast. I think you got to sprinkle in a little bit, but I leave most of that up to my analyst. And I think it's just my influences. I grew up in BC, so I listened to Jim Robson on the radio, one of the all-time greats, a Hall of Famer. And, that was sort of his approach, call the game and do it in a straightforward fashion. And the other guy that I loved more than anybody else growing up as a play-by-play guy was Bob Cole. And Bob was big on sort of the energy of the game and the best at just using the rise and fall of his voice to reflect what was happening on the ice. So I think merging the approaches of the two guys I heard the most and liked the most growing up and as a young broadcaster influenced how I approach the game now as a play-by-play guy.
John?
Yeah, same thing, really. When you think of the way that Bob Cole sort of orchestrates the game, right? It's all about the ebbs and flows from that aspect. Danny Gallivan and Dick Irvin as well, for me, two others, where it's about the game. The players are the stars, as Bob would say, right? So I think it's all about translating the energy of the building, translating the energy of the ice, and yeah, the game is really the story. The other thing I've said to a few people too, and this is kind of, I think, what Rick was alluding to, where we're of similar philosophy that way. When you think of the information age we live in, two things happen right now. I think, one, a lot of people watch the game with a phone in their hand, so they're reading information as you go along, and we have a lot going on our screens. The other side of it too right now, I think that you sort of, when you look at the balance of what to do, is think of how many people are on the air. If I use, for example, a Leaf game that we're doing, Greg is beside me. We've got Sean McKenzie and Chris Johnson doing some intermission stuff. And then David Amber's in studio with Elliot Friedman and Todd Warner or Colby Armstrong. There could be 7 other people on air at the same time of the game I'm doing. 7 other people talking, bringing information, bringing stories. So I don't think you want to cross over to that too much. I think my job is to call the play, give you what's going on in the game, and let everyone else sort of fill in with everything they want to bring, because I think you have a danger sometimes of trying to overload, taking in too much of what everyone else wants to bring. So, but again, I think that I agree with you, Rick. That sort of goes back to Bob Cole and Danny Gallivan, and just where it was all about the game, all about the action, and go with it from there, and just everything else, fills in as you go along.
Yeah, I like to mix in. I think John's the same way, like a little bit of the new school too. I mean, the trick is, and I'm by no means the best at this, but I think there's a balance where, we all do prep, and I'm sure I don't think I've seen John's notes, but I think every play-by-play guy has a bunch of notes and a way to prep and a lot of information. The trick is to just use the stuff that fits within the context of what's happening in that particular game. The risk is when you do all the prep is you want to cram it all in, but sometimes it doesn't make sense based on what's going on. So the tidbits that fit with what's happening, I think, work within the flow of what's going on. And I'm also not opposed to talking to the color guy too during the course of the play. Some old schoolers don't like doing that. I don't have a problem with that, but again, there's a balance. You got to know when to pull back on the conversation and stick with just describing what's going on. So there's no hard and fast rules. I think it's more of a feel. But again, the biggest thing from my perspective is the influences of the guys I listen to coming up, and then trying to incorporate some of the new stuff that's going on.
It's funny. When I started, the first thing I did was try to talk to the best broadcasters of color I could find in the game. And I talked to Harry Neal and John Davison, and they were kind enough to show me their notes and send me some information. I'll never forget what John Davidson said. He said, "Don't call a game in a briefcase." In other words, don't start calling a game because you've got 5 notes in front of you or 50 notes in front of you, and darn it, you're going to get every note in because you've worked so hard to do it. And we've all worked with those kind. It's great to be prepared, but if that game's going back and forth, I love you too, because you call the game. And as a color guy, I get the heck out of the way, because then I can get in the way when a game's good. And Bob always taught us, don't get in the way of the game. It's all about the players. And by the way, I talked to Bob Cole last night for everybody and all the fans.
Oh, how's he doing?
Well, he's doing great. He's like all the rest of us, Bob. But Bob's in rare form. He's great, and would love to do another game. You know that.
Absolutely.
And that's why we love it.
Like I said, my favorite of all time, him and Jim Robson are right there. And I had a chance, it's funny you said that. I mentioned Jim Robson. So my first year doing play-by-play with the Kelowna Rockets, Jim Robson's son was an engineer at a different radio station in Kelowna at the time, and he happened to be visiting. We managed to get him to actually join us in the broadcast booth, Brad Fay, me, and Jim Robson for a game. Can you believe it? As a young broadcaster. And Brad Fay is a Vancouver guy, and he was in heaven. It was remarkable, and Jim was so gracious and obviously great on the air. And then after the game, he asked me if I'd like to meet for breakfast the next morning. And him and I sat at the Eldorado Hotel on Okanagan Lake in Kelowna, and I picked his brain for 3 hours, and it was unbelievable how much information he was able to help me. And you really can't. All you guys, I'm sure, get emails from young broadcasters who want you to critique their work and and give them some advice. And it's difficult, other than my biggest thing is just try and get reps, do as many games as you can, because you have to develop your own style. I mean, there are certain things you can point to and say you should probably do this differently, but generally that's the best advice you can give. The biggest thing that Jim Robson taught me was how to lay out his notes. He mentioned that about Greg talking to John Davidson about how he said, keep everything on as few pieces of paper as possible. And he had a whole system to his. And I thought that was great advice, because you're flipping through pages and pages trying to find something. You can't do it. You don't have time. And just sort of the nuts and bolts of preparing for a broadcast. With that information, to this day, I use a lot of the things that he showed me in that meeting, 25 years ago. So I'll be forever grateful to Jim Robson for doing that.
And what a class man, as we all know.
Yeah.
Question: favorite players along the way? Favorite stories, whether it's junior?
Well, growing up as a BC guy, I was a Vancouver Canucks fan. So obviously,
No, but I mean as a broadcaster, though.
Oh, as a broadcaster.
As a broadcaster, yeah.
Oh gosh, I get to see Johnny Gaudreau play all the time. When he's on his game, he's as exciting as anybody in the National Hockey League. And because I've seen every game he's played in the NHL, I love watching Johnny play. Sidney Crosby is the greatest of his generation. Connor McDavid. I mean, nobody has the explosiveness that he. What he reminds me of, guys, and this is one of my favorite players growing up, is Pavel Bure. I think Connor McDavid is Pavel Bure with better hands. That's
interesting. Yeah.
Like, he's got that kind of speed that is a whole other level above everybody else in the entire National Hockey League. But I think he's got a better skill set than Pavel did. And I don't want to disparage Pavel, one of the great goal scorers in the history of the NHL. But I just think McDavid has a better game overall than Pavel Bure. But when I watch him skate, that's who he reminds me of. That ability, when he looks like he's contained, to just pull away from everybody else. It is remarkable. So there's so many great players in the game. Calling junior hockey, the first couple of years I was in Kelowna doing the Rockets, Patrick Marleau was a 16 and a 17-year-old playing with the Seattle Thunderbirds. Yeah. Maybe the best junior. I saw Marian Hossa play in Portland as well. Those were the three best guys I got to cover for the 5 years I was in the league, I think. There were a lot of great players. But so watching Patrick Marleau have the career that he has and still playing at this age, think back to all those years when he was 16 and getting a chance to see him play and just being an incredible junior player. He's one of my favorite players just because he was a guy I saw at the very beginning, and he's still going all these years later.
How about off ice? We have our guys, guys that you've gravitated to for different reasons.
Yeah, well, I did Vancouver Canucks hockey for 5 or 6 years on the radio before I came to Calgary. So, the guys there that I love were the Sedin twins, and class acts on and off the ice. Two of the nicest people you'll ever meet, let alone hockey players. Really liked Kevin Bieksa when I was there. Here in Calgary, lots of great guys. Mark Giordano is a terrific guy. He really, great guy to talk to. You look up and down that lineup. Michael Backlund's one of them. All the Swedes are nice. It just seems like
funny how that works.
Along with the Swede. It is.
Yeah.
And in the organization, Brad Treliving's a terrific guy to deal with, and he's been the GM ever since I've been here in Calgary. So I got along really well. This is funny. I was talking to somebody else about this the other day in our business, and they agreed. I really got along with John Tortorella for the year that he was in Vancouver. I didn't know John particularly well until he got there. And of course he came with a reputation, and he was a pleasant surprise to deal with as a guy who talked to him every single game day. We had to do our little hit for the radio, and I got along great. We always have good talks when the Flames and the Columbus Blue Jackets play. There's so many great people in this business. I mean, the list is, hundreds and hundreds of people. Too impossible to mention everybody. My partner, Kelly Hrudey, one of the great guys too. So,
yeah,
that's the best part of this job, guys, is the people you get to meet and hang around with. They really are terrific. And most of them are, you hear about the bad apples sometimes, which is too bad because there's way more good apples.
That's for sure. And, you talk about John Tortorella. Bob McGilligot, who is the radio broadcaster for the Columbus Blue Jackets, will appear on another episode here from the booth. And he gets more into that relationship of what Tortorella is like for the broadcasters and what he's like away from the rink. It's pretty good in depth. But you're right. There's a lot of great people, and we don't get a chance to see each other too much because of the East-West. So this is actually a treat that you and I get to chat face-to-face, sort of, in this environment.
Yeah.
Because we're like two ships passing the night if we ever do cross each other in the city.
Well, and also because we're not just geography, we do the same job. So no broadcast ever has two play-by-play guys unless you're a visiting team. So once in a while you'll bump into a guy, but if you're working for the same network, it doesn't happen very often. So good to see you, John. Yeah, you haven't aged a bit since the last time I saw you. Millsy, whole other story.
Other story there, yeah.
I don't need to see you anymore.
I have to keep you play-by-play guys honest. That's all. That's part of my job, just keep you in line.
Yeah.
You had any? You barbecued any steaks lately?
Oh, the all-time great steakhouse guy. I thought I played with a few guys, but you might be looking at him right here. We had.
You're like this, John. I turned Millsy into an absolute carnivore a couple of years ago during that playoff series. So this is
I know. I've heard about it.
I got to find. So all we do now, we never text. We never say hi, how you doing, how's the family. All we do is send each other pictures of us barbecuing steak. That's it. No comment, nothing. I got to hold on here. This is the last one I sent to Millsy.
Oh, there you go. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
And he usually wins the award of quality too. I'm quite impressed. Western Canada, they're known for their steak. So
Alberta meat.
Alberta meat, absolutely.
You know what's so funny about that is all us crews, we're all the same clowns that way because the guys make fun of me for my post-game nachos all the time. So there was my last order of nachos.
Just wonderful eating. Wonderful eating, boys. Well done.
Millsy is always complaining about your choices for cuisine there, Bart.
Oh, they're good.
Do you even use cutlery?
The barbecue. Yes. Every lunch is barbecue. It's a barbecue.
Good barbecue, though. Good barbecue. Rick would
I will say they're good barbecues. Yes, they are.
Yes. All right. On that note, I'm hungry. We're out of time. Time to go eat. Maybe nachos or steak need to be on the grill. Rick, it was great chatting with you. This has been a lot of fun, and thanks for taking the time with us today. And keep that beard in good shape right now.
All right, John and Greg, great talking to you guys too. And take care, everybody. And hopefully everybody's healthy and happy, and hopefully we can get the season finished. Keeping our fingers crossed for that.
Well said. Yeah, let's stay safe, everybody, and you too, Rick.
Well, we had a great chat with Rick, and we learned a lot today, especially about Kelly Hrudey, and maybe that putting ice in the wine is just a cover-up if he doesn't like it.
Well, I warned you Rick was a funny guy, and he really is, and a lot of fun to be around on the road. Yes, we had more than a few meals together, and a wonderful broadcaster, too, so that was fun.
Yes, he is. And it's true what we said. We don't often get a chance to see each other in person with how we don't cross paths the way we normally would with the travel. So it was great to chat with him, and we didn't even get a chance to touch on his football or anything like that he's done, so we'll have to save that for next time. And we hope you join us next time for From the Booth. Thanks for watching, everyone. So long.